Well, shalom. My name is Todd Bennett, and this is the weekly audio recording of the Shema Yisrael Newsletter titled, Are You Planning for the Future and Preparing for the Journey Home? This was originally published on day 9 of month 8 on the Creator's calendar, also known as November 5th, 2022 on the Roman calendar. Well, last week I mentioned the fact that while the Feast of Ingathering is over, also known as Sukkot, our focus now turns to the next harvest. The work continues, as do the cycles of time, and that is the way of a Hebrew. Sometimes people get to the end of month 7 and think that since the feasting is over, we're in a hiatus until we return to month 1. But that's simply not so. And that reminds me of an artifact found at Tel Gezer. Now, over the last year, I think I mentioned the ancient city of Gezer on several occasions, and I like to take groups there because it's such an interesting city in the tribal lands of Ephraim near the border with Dan. It was located on the eastern foothills of the coastal plain known as the Shephelah, and Gezer is approximately centered between the Mediterranean Sea to the west and Jerusalem to the east. It was a strategic location that Solomon fortified along with Hatzor and Megiddo, and we read about that in 1 Kings 9, 15 through 17. The reason he did so was because they were all located on the major trade route called the Via Maris. The Via Maris connected Africa with Europe and Asia, and that's why the land of Israel is often called the land bridge or the sacred bridge. Now, Gezer was not only on the Via Maris, it also was at the crossroads that intersected with the road that led from the seaport of Jaffa to Jerusalem and beyond. So Gezer was literally at the crossroads of the world. And it's no coincidence that Yah chose this piece of land, the covenant land, for her covenant people. The nations passed through this land, traversing to and from the four corners of the earth. As a result, his people were supposed to be an example to the nations as they passed through. Gezer was actually one of the 10 Levitical cities allotted to the Kohathites. It contains 10 cultic standing stones that some believed were involved in child sacrificial rituals. Others believed that the stones were covenant markers, and there's no real clear answer to this question. But it could be that they acted as a memorial for the 10 connected cities of the Kohathites or the 10 tribes of Israel under the rulership of Ephraim, since this was in the land of Ephraim. And Ephraim tended to be the leader of the 10 tribes of the house of Yisrael. So that they may have acted like the standing pillars raised by Moses at Sinai, or even the stones plastered by Joshua at Shechem, a sort of mezuzah for people who were passing through so they could read the Torah. There was actually an entrance point, so it could have been for that purpose. Well, because it was a Levitical city, it was a priestly city, and that was likely part of the significance of the ancient boundary markers found at Gezer that we mentioned several months ago when we talked about boundaries. It was supposed to be a set-apart city, so it was important to know the boundaries of the city. Well, we know that the tribe of Ephraim did not fully remove the Canaanites from their territory. Instead, they placed the Canaanites into forced servitude, and we read about that in Joshua 16:10 and Judges 1:29. And that was a critical mistake because it meant that the Canaanites would continue their idolatry and, in turn, influence the people of the land. Yah told the Israelites to remove the people of the land, and he did not tell them to turn them into slaves. As a result, the history of its inhabitants is somewhat murky, being at the intersection of Israel, Judah, and the land of the Philistines. It consisted of a variety of different people groups over time. It was not until the reign of King David that the Philistines were driven back as far as Gezer, according to 2 Samuel 5:25, and it was finally taken over and burned by Pharaoh of Egypt. He killed the Canaanites who lived there and gave it to Solomon as a dowry. And we read about that in 1 Kings 9:16. That's when Solomon made the repairs and fortified it, as I mentioned previously. So what an important city in the covenant land with quite a history, and what an opportunity for the inhabitants of Gezer. Located in the Shephelah, at the crossroads of the world, the Levites and the Ephraimites had an opportunity to shine as a light to the world from a city on a hill. That was the mandate of Israel. After all, they were supposed to be a kingdom of priests and a holy or set-apart nation, according to Exodus 19:6. Well, sadly, the city failed to remain set apart due to the proximity of the Philistines and the influences of the passing nations and their goods. They fell into idolatry. So it was an important location with a lot of potential, but the Israelites lost their focus. We know that the Canaanites performed child sacrifices in order to obtain the favor of Baal, and it's suspected but not confirmed that the Philistines did the same to Dagon. It's important to note that child sacrifice often went part and parcel with birth control in ancient times, and in some cultures, people threw unwanted babies onto trash heaps, into sewers and rivers, while others burned them. So we sometimes look at this as, child sacrifice as a horrendous thing in the past, but there were many ways that people disposed of unwanted children. As sad as that is, it's the reality of what was happening in ancient times. And today, most modern societies perform these rituals in sterilized clinics and hospitals, calling it a medical procedure based upon a healthcare choice. Well, call it what you want. It's all an abrogation of the responsibility bestowed upon parents. It's an abomination, and it's still child sacrifice, no matter how you want to term it. Some people gladly sacrificed their unwanted newborns, especially if it came with a blessing from the gods, and typically it was so that they would yield a bountiful harvest. And you see, despite the fact that the inhabitants of Gezer had all the exotic goods of the world passing by, they still had to work for their daily bread. And that leads to the one of the most popular finds at Tel Gezer, known as the Gezer calendar, and that's why I brought it up, because when I think of the continuing harvest, I think of the Gezer calendar. Now, as I explained in a previous article, it's not really a calendar in the sense of reckoning time. Rather, it's more of a schedule for the agricultural year. The significance of the find is the fact that it showed the need to plan ahead, even for those at the crossroads of the world. You can't eat clothing, jewelry, and other luxurious goods. You need basic sustenance to survive, and the people of Gezer weren't going to have anything to harvest at the time of the harvest if they didn't plant seeds at the proper time. Now, I've lived my life surrounded by farmers who are well aware of the need to orchestrate their lives around the seasons, and sadly, most of us are completely detached from this rhythm when it comes to our own survival. Sure, we know that our wardrobes and tires need to be changed with the seasons, especially in the north. When winter comes, you want to get your snow tires on, and we understand the changing seasons. But Babylon feeds us, so we just rely upon the store for all our needs. Incredibly, some people's diets would vary depending upon the seasons and the crops. But in Babylon, we eat whatever we want, whenever we want it. And I'm not so sure that's a good thing when examining our health. You know what they say about too much of a good thing. Well, we live in an on-demand culture which breeds impatience and requires little planning. This can be problematic for many, especially in the days to come. As winter approaches, there may be difficult times for those who rely on constant resupply of food and fuels, along with instant electricity and water. Any disruption of these vital resources could lead to hunger, sickness, freezing, and death for those who failed to plan. And it also reveals, again, our continued dependency on Babylon to keep things going. Well, so planning is important. And like I said, if people didn't plant at the right time, there would be nothing to harvest during the time of the harvest. So we need to have a plan, like those who inscribed the Gezer calendar. The barley and the wheat are planted in the autumn so that they can be harvested in the spring and leading up to summer. The barley is right before the wheat is, so it's the grain harvest spans typically from month 1 into month 3, maybe beyond. It's time to get planting because it's autumn. So what's your plan for the next harvest? Do you have seed? Have you prepared the soil? Are you ready to plant? And of course, I'm talking about that in a physical, real sense, but we also have the spiritual applications that we need to look at too, because the appointed times revolve around the harvest schedule, but they also have spiritual lessons for us to learn. Well, right now in America, most people are expending their time and energy focused on the upcoming midterm elections. They're expecting a great harvest for their political party and completely ignoring the harvest of the kingdom. And I just encourage people, please do not be deceived. Even if the Republicans retake Congress, they aren't going to save America. This is all a distraction and an illusion being perpetrated upon a people who desperately want to maintain the comforts and privileges afforded to them by the world reserve currency status of the dollar. In fact, have you ever looked at a dollar bill? I used to be a paper boy in my youth, and I handled a lot of dollar bills, and I remember wondering why on earth there was a pyramid on the back of the dollar with a creepy eye hovering over it. Most people don't even ask the question why something so seemingly Egyptian would be on the money of the United States of America. Well, I deal some of the ancient symbolism. I deal with that in my book, titled Restoration, where I look at the different symbols that are on the back of the dollar and other things. The fact that America is part of the beast system is really hidden in plain sight, along with all of the pagan symbolism on display around the Capitol in the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. So if you're resting your hopes in Babylonian currency, then you're in for a big disappointment. I was going through final edits on a Leaving Babylon book this week. Chapter 1 is titled The Awakening. And it reminded me that it's really critical that people wake up from the Babylonian dream state that they have been steeped in their entire lives. And interestingly, while the lost sheep of the house of Israel are waking up through a revival of the dry bones as prophesied by Ezekiel, there's a false woke movement that's leading people further down the Babylonian rabbit hole. So we've got all these people waking up to different things, and in the midst of it, Yah is waking up his people. So if you're one of the house of Israel, then you must realign your thinking. You must detach from Babylon and connect to the covenant. So many people are placing their future hopes in getting certain people elected, which is not the solution required for Israel. While it is common for Americans to be immersed in politics, it's a betrayal of our allegiance to our true king if we belong to Israel. And let me just clarify, while I see nothing wrong with voting for a good candidate, there's a problem when we place our faith, hope, and trust in a candidate or a political party. How many of us pledged allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands? One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I know that I did 5 days a week with my hand on my heart for 13 years of my life, K through 12. That's a lot of pledging ingrained in a person. And in grade school, that pledge was followed up with a nice little song, God Bless America. And the rendition was, My Home Sweet Home. Well, that conditioning and those attachments are hard for many to recognize and uproot. That's why they do it to kids in school. It's a sort of brainwashing. Well, then add the religion of Christianity that blended so well with the idea that America was a sort of spiritual Israel. I spent half my life completely brainwashed into thinking that America was the promised land of Christianity. After all, it was described as a Christian nation. I was told that America was the source of the Bible and Bible distribution and missionaries, and America was really the one responsible for spreading the gospel all over the world. It was a bastion of freedom and promoter of truth. And it just so happened to be replete with a gigantic statue of the goddess Athena, welcoming the poor, the tired, and all the huddled masses. Well, that seems odd for a Christian nation that supposedly follows the Ten Commandments. But, I forgot. Those were ordered removed from public display, as was prayer in school. So much for In God We Trust. And interestingly, none of this reversed course during the presidency of Donald Trump, and I don't see turning back to Yahuwah Elohim on any Republican agendas this election cycle. Most are simply concerned about the economy, inflation, jobs, the deficit, our military strength, the threat of China, etc., etc. I don't hear anyone saying, hey, wait a minute, haven't we forgotten Elohim in all this? Aren't we under a curse? Didn't we used to call ourselves a Christian nation? Shouldn't we repent and turn to Yahuwah? Well, some Christians are waiting for revival to happen. They fail to recognize that it's already happening. The problem is that it's not what they're expecting. The word revive is defined as to bring back to life or to consciousness, to resuscitate. People in many Christian realms are looking for another Azusa Street revival or Charles Finney to come along and preach revival. But the revival prophesied in the scriptures involves the dry bones of Yisrael living. And let's read about that in Ezekiel. It says, the hand of Yahuwah came upon me and brought me out in Ruach of Yahuwah and set me down in the midst of the valley, and it was full of bones. Then he caused me to pass by them all around. And behold, there were very many in the open valley, and indeed they were very dry. And he said to me, Son of man, can these bones live? So I answered, O Adonai, Yahuwah, you know. Again he said to me, prophesy to these bones, and say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of Yahuwah. Thus says Adonai Yahuwah to those bones, surely I will cause breath to enter into you, and you shall live. I will put sinews on you, and bring flesh upon you, cover you with skin, and put breath in you, and you shall live. Then you shall know that I am Yahuwah. So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I prophesied, there was a noise, and suddenly a rattling, and the bones came together, bone to bone. Indeed, as I looked, the sinews and the flesh came upon them, and the skin covered them over, but there was no breath in them. Also he said to me, prophesy to the breath. Prophesy, Son of man, and say to the breath, thus says Yahuwah, Adonai Yahuwah, come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe on these slain, that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and breath came into them, and they lived and stood upon their feet, an exceedingly great army. Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Yisrael. They indeed say, our bones are dry, our hope is lost, and we ourselves are cut off. Therefore prophesy, and say to them, thus says Adonai Yahuwah, behold, O my people, I will open your graves and cause you to come up from your graves and bring you into the land of Yisrael. Then you shall know that I am Yahuwah, when I have opened your graves, O my people, and brought you up from your graves. I will put my Ruach in you, and you shall live, and I will place you in your own land. Then you shall know that I, Yahuwah, have spoken it and performed it, says Yahuwah. Well, notice that Ezekiel had to speak the prophet and prophesy twice to see the fulfillment, with actually the breath getting in. So the bones, there was a resurrection of the flesh, but then the breath had to be prophesied into them separately. Also, the phrase exceedingly great army can be translated a very, very great congregation. Kail. The Hebrew word Kail shares the same roots as the word Keel, which refers to a birth pang. So the implication is that this great revival and resurrection will be through a birthing process, and it will include a return to the land. Yahushua paved the way for the house of Israel to return and said that we must be born again. So there was no mistake concerning his purpose. He specifically stated that he came for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, Matthew 15:24. So I hope that you're all free from the illusion that an American politician will save you and that a red wave during the midterms is the answer to prayer, especially after witnessing the spectacle of the last several years. With political signs everywhere, ask yourself, whose banner am I raising? Do you have a Trump 2024 sign bigger than your mezuzah? Do you even have a mezuzah on your doorpost and on your gates? Does the name of Yahuwah adorn your gates, or the name of some politician? Are you promoting a man or a woman, or are you promoting Yahuwah? These are important questions because it's critical to know who or what you are representing to the world. The inhabitants of Gezer had the world coming to their doorstep, yet the last mention we have was when Pharaoh killed the Canaanites and Solomon reinforced it for war and got it ready for attacks. If their focus had been on being priests to the nations, I suspect we would have read a different final account. Instead, it took a pagan Egyptian ruler to finish the job, and then it involved the king of Israel marrying his daughter? Really? And when we read these accounts, there should be sirens and red flags waving because it describes the effects of disobedience. Sadly, the inhabitants of Gezer were in the land, and they lost focus of their purpose. They failed to obey Yahuwah, as did all of Israel. Now, we're currently outside the land, awaiting our return, just as Ezekiel had prophesied. But if we cannot learn to be set apart now, why would Yahuwah actually bring us home to his set-apart land? Just so he can repeat the previous sins of the house of Israel? Well, I think not. So instead of lifting up a politician, I suggest that we lift up Yahuwah and his resurrected son, Yeshua. Very interestingly, many Orthodox Jews believe that they found their Messiah in a man named Rav Shlomo Yehuda ben David. They refer to him as the Yanuka, which means the child, because he was adept from a very young age in the tenets of rabbinical Judaism. Some also refer to him as Ha-Gaon, which is an honorific title likened to genius. It appears the progeny of the Pharisees, the rabbinic Jews, have finally found their man. The rabbis are now kissing his hand and singing his praises. Interestingly, his qualifications are his knowledge of the rabbinic writings. The problem is that the rabbis add to the Torah, which is specifically forbidden in the Torah. And if the Yanuka truly understood the Torah as taught by Yeshua, he would reject the oral Torah. Instead, he excels in the teachings of the Pharisees. In contrast, Yeshua specifically opposed the oral Torah of the Pharisees, and that's why they hated him and sought to kill him. Yeshua called the Pharisees hypocrites for their beliefs and practices, and his criticism carries forward to rabbinic Judaism. Here's what he said. He said, "Hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy about you, saying, 'These people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men.'" Now we can see that the religions of the world are molding messiahs that fit into their version of truth. The Christians hold up a lawless Christ named Jesus. The Orthodox Jews have a legalistic Pharisee who teaches and promotes the oral Torah, and some believe he's the Messiah. Not everybody's there yet, but it looks like it's headed in that direction. Well, I fully expect a being named Jesus to manifest in the future and fit into the paradigm of the Jesus promoted by Islam, because Muslims say that they believe in Jesus as well. They just think that Muhammad came later and he was a greater prophet than Jesus. So we've got all these religions that have their different ideas and their notions, and they're going to find something or someone that will fit into it. Well, many are being deceived and will continue to be deceived because they reject the knowledge of the Torah. As a result, they are easily led astray by pleasant words and promises of peace. The Yanuka seems like a nice guy, just like the Pope. They speak words of peace, but their teachings contradict the Torah. Speaking of peace, last week I returned from Jerusalem, which is called the City of Peace. And the good thing about traveling to the land for the appointed times is the fact that I'm reminded I'm not home permanently. Every time I go there, I have to turn around and leave. Well, I no longer call or sing America, my home sweet home anymore. I'm not welcome in the Jewish state for more than 90 days at a time. And even though I'm in a covenant with Yahuwah that promises land and expect to inherit that land someday, I'm still just a visitor. According to the powers that be, I'm a sojourner, a toshab, waiting to return home. If you are from the house of Israel, you should be considering that truth during every Hag. And the fact that you're not dwelling in the land should be an indication that we have not been restored to the covenant because we are still living in exile. And the problem is that most of us have been steeped within a Babylonian-infused religion that completely ignores that message. Most Christians believe that they're currently saved and everything is just A-okay. In fact, Christianity wants you to build churches and houses, settle down in Babylon, plant roots, and get comfortable until you die or you get raptured. Well, that was the message of Jeremiah for the house of Judah going into Babylonian exile. It's the opposite for the house of Israel waiting for return. Jeremiah told them, go build houses, you're going to be there for a while. But that's not the situation that we're in. Our promise of building houses is in the land, and it's provided by Isaiah in Isaiah 65. And Hosea revealed the path for us in the later days. First, Yahweh defined the problem for the house of Israel. And I already mentioned it. It says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge because you have rejected the knowledge. And I should have said for lack of the knowledge because there's a ha in there, the knowledge. Because you have rejected the knowledge, I reject you from being a priest to me. And since you have forgotten the Torah of your Elohim, I also will forget your children. Well, the house of Israel forgot the Torah. They adopted pagan practices and had the audacity to worship Yahweh in two locations in the form of a golden calf, up in Dan and in Bethel. They claimed to continue to worship Yahweh, but they were actually committing idolatry. They were worshiping the wrong way, in the wrong location at the wrong time. And this is really no different than what Christianity has done to the worship of Yahweh. Most Christians have forgotten the Torah and rejected the knowledge. Here's what would happen to the house of Israel as a result of their sins. We read it further in Hosea. For the children of Israel shall dwell many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or pillar, without ephod or household gods. Afterward, the children of Israel shall return and seek Yahweh their Elohim and David their king, and they shall come in fear to Yahweh and to his goodness in the latter days. Well, did you notice the reference to the latter days and David their king? A reference to the Messiah, son of David. Well, the Yanuka is called Ben David, and how convenient is that? We know that Yeshua is the Messiah, Ben David, the son of David. In order to be the son of David, he had to be descended from David and circumcised on the 8th day into the covenant. That's the only way he could renew the covenant with Israel. The children of Israel can only return to Yahweh and David their king through that renewed covenant. It's been many days, as Hosea mentioned, and it's getting close to the time to return. There's a promise in Hosea if we return to the knowledge. It says, come and let us return to Yahweh, for he is torn, but he will heal us. He is stricken, but he will bind us. After 2 days he will revive us. On the 3rd day he will raise us up, that we may live in his sight. Let us pursue the knowledge of Yahweh. His going forth is established as the morning. He will come to us like the rain, like the latter and former rain to the earth. Now, it's interesting that when I was recently over in Israel a couple weeks ago, I witnessed the former rains that came right after Sukkot, and I put a video up for that. Former rains are the first rains that come on the crops. They're usually lighter rains, and then you have the latter rains that give the crops all the boost to finish up and get ready for harvest. Well, remember what Yeshua prophesied concerning his resurrection? He says, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified, and he will be raised up on the third day." Well, being raised on the third day was not an arbitrary amount of time. It was very specific, and it was purposeful, and it was about the house of Israel. Remember, that was the one sign that Yeshua would grant to an evil generation. He says, "And while the crowds were thickly gathered together, he began to say, 'This is an evil generation. It seeks a sign, and no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah the prophet. For as Jonah became a sign to the Ninevites, so also the Son of Man will be to this generation.'" Well, remember that Jonah was called to preach to Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian kingdom. And the Assyrians were used by Yahweh to punish and completely remove the house of Israel from the land. The punishment period of 2,730 years is like 3 days and 3 nights in the eyes of Yahweh. And we read about that in 2 Peter 3:8. So most Christians have no idea why Yeshua stayed in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights, because they're completely disconnected from the covenant and the prophecies concerning a restoration of the house of Israel. Yeshua was raised up on the third day as a sign for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, that they would be raised up on the third day through him, just as was prophesied. Now all they need to do is repent, return to Yahweh and his ways. And there's a great promise awaiting them in the final portion of Hosea. It says, "Return, O Israel, to Yahweh your Elohim, for you have stumbled because of your iniquity. Take with you words and return to Yahweh. Say to him, take away all iniquity, except what is good, and we will pay with bulls the vows of our lips. Assyria shall not save us. We will not ride on horses, and we will say no more, our Elohim, to the work of our hands. In you the orphan finds mercy. I will heal their apostasy. I will love them freely, for my anger has turned from them. I will be like the dew to Israel. He shall blossom like the lily. He shall take root like the trees of Lebanon. His shoots shall spread out. His beauty shall be like the olive, and his fragrance like Lebanon. They shall return and dwell beneath my shadow. They shall flourish like the grain. They shall blossom like the vine. Their fame shall be like the wine of Lebanon. O Ephraim, what have I to do with idols? It is I who answer and look after you. I am like an evergreen cypress. From me comes your fruit. Whoever is wise, let him understand these things. Whoever is discerning, let him know them. For the ways of Yahweh are right, and the upright walk in them, but transgressors stumble in them. Well, incredibly, my journey home began in Lebanon back in 1999. I was there for a wedding of all things. I'll never forget standing outside at night during the reception on the Mediterranean, looking up at the stars. I realized that the covenant land was just south of me, and I needed to go there. I was literally living this prophecy. And we also read about that in Zechariah 10. And as I began returning to the land, I saw the prophetic promises unfolding in their proper context, outside the confines of Christian doctrine. Remember that Joshua, whose real name was Yeshua, was first named Hosea. So the prophet Hosea points us to knowledge and the true Messiah, Yeshua. These are no coincidences. And so take words and repent. Say to him these words, take away all iniquity, accept what is good, and we will pay with bulls the vows of our lips. Assyria shall not save us. We will not ride on horses, and we will say no more, our Elohim, to the work of our hands. In you the orphan finds mercy. We're not home in Babylon. We are orphans, and we require mercy. According to Hosea, those who understand the words of Yahuwah and walk in them are considered to be among the wise and discerning in the latter days. That's why Yeshua gave one of his final parables concerning 10 virgins. The number 10 symbolized the lost sheep of the house of Israel, the 10 lost tribes. They were described as virgins because they were on their way to a wedding. And here's the parable. It says, "Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a cry, 'Here is the bridegroom. Come out to meet him.' Then all these virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, 'Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out.' But the wise answered, saying, 'Since there will not be enough for us and for you, go rather to the dealers and buy for yourselves.' And while they were going to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. Afterward the other virgins came also, saying, 'Lord, Lord, open to us.' But he answered, 'Truly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour.'" Now, did you notice that all 10 initially went to meet the bridegroom? Many Christians are currently waiting to be raptured from Babylon. They have no plan to leave and meet the bridegroom in the wilderness. Also notice that all took lamps, but only the wise took flasks full of oil. While the foolish had some oil, they didn't have enough for the journey. When darkness came, they all needed their own light. The foolish couldn't walk in the light of the wise. They needed their own oil for their own lamps. They were told to go buy their own, but what if there was none to buy? Or what if they could only buy or sell with a mark? This is a parable with extremely significant teachings for this generation. Interestingly, there's been a lot of talk about oil shortages and gas shortages, and that's an issue that the virgins must contend with as well. Of course, when we think of oil and lamps, we should be immediately drawn to the menorah, as well as Zechariah 4. You carry a flask of oil to both anoint and to fuel a lamp. It's portable. The wise weren't carrying 55-gallon drums with them. And the word of Yahuwah is referred to as a lamp and a light in Psalm 119:105. And oil is what fuels the lamp so that it provides that light. The righteous and salvation of Zion is reckoned with brightness and a lamp that burns in Isaiah 62:1. In fact, this all points to our final destination, Zion. It is the dwelling place of Yahuwah, where there he will make the horn of David grow. He says, "I will prepare a lamp for my anointed, my Mashiach," in Psalm 132:17. So the daughters of Zion are the wise virgins. They have the testimony of Yeshua and are keeping the commandments, as we read about in Revelation 12:17, 14:12, and 22:14. They're the ones who make it to the tree of life, and of course, located in New Jerusalem, and of course, the marriage supper, the wedding. So, instead of building kingdoms and settling down in Babylon, we need to be maintaining oil and flasks in order to keep our lamps lit during times of darkness. The pattern of deliverance involves separating from those who are being judged. We saw it with Noah, Abram, and Lot. Our primary example is found in the judgment and deliverance from Egypt. Worldwide judgment is coming upon Babylon. There's no doubt about that. If you insist upon clinging to Babylon or returning to Babylon, you can expect a fall under judgment as well. That's a promise, according to Revelation 18:4. Therefore, I encourage you not to wait until month 1 to start preparing for Passover and the harvest. That will be too late. Remember the Gezer calendar. You need to start planting now. If you desire to be counted among the wise, you need to be found set apart with oil in your lamps and oil in your flasks. That involves planning for the future, so you're ready when the call goes out and the lights go out. Barakot, my name is Todd Bennett with ShemaYisrael.net. Shalom.